Okay, good morning. It is lovely to be here and to do the breakfast session. We always sponsor this one because it's the only session of the day with a meal in the title, and we're very food-oriented at Edge. Thank you for making this pit stop with us and joining the starting lineup. I promise no more F1 jokes. But yeah, it's really lovely to be here. And if you don't know our work at the Edge Foundation, I'm Ollie Newton, the exec director there. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on, twice a year, we produce a skills shortages bulletin. And that's a chance really to share some of the kind of key information that's come out recently about how the economy is faring, how jobs are going, what's looking like it's going to happen in the future. We just published the recent one. There's some copies on table, so people are welcome. And if you're watching this video again, it's on our website to download. Some really interesting messages this time and things that keep kind of coming back again and again, but in kind of slightly new ways. One thing I think that came out really strongly this time was the regional differences that we're starting to see. So recent work from Learning and Work Institute, whose event we're at today, and also from the Careers and Enterprise Company, really showing the disparity between London and the rest and between different regions in terms of the advice young people are getting, kind of aspirations they might have, and also some of the impacts of different jobs in the economy. There's also a really important picture in terms of the different sectors of the economy as well. And I think skill shortages and the economy are one of those areas where kind of simplification sometimes happens, particularly in policy-making circles, and actually it's really important to dig down and understand what's happening in individual sectors. And that's why we thought it'd be really good to focus on a very specific sector, both in the report as an annex to our bulletin, and in today's session, where we'll be thinking about F1 as a kind of lens for the kind of skills that are needed in the wider economy. So I'm really happy to welcome a brilliant panel. What we're going to do this morning is I'll introduce each of these speakers, we'll hear a little bit from them, and then we'll have a bit of a conversation about kind of the broader issues and bring you in as well. It's breakfast time, it's early, so let's keep it informal. If you need to grab a drink, that's absolutely fine, and we'll be kind of making it a bit more conversational than some of the kind of formal later sessions. So it's absolutely lovely to have you here. So Beatrice, I'm going to come to you first. Beatrice is Head of Policy at Engineering UK. And I wonder if you could just introduce yourself, but also tell us a little bit about where you see the most kind of critical gaps being in the STEM sector at the moment.
Okay. So I'm Beatrice. I'm the Head of Policy and Public Affairs at Engineering UK. Sorry, I'm sort of feel like in a spotlight and can't see anything. We are an organisation, for those who don't know, that is all about inspiring and encouraging the next generation of young people to go into engineering. We do that through research, through running our own programs, working in partnership with others, but also through our advocacy work, looking at the pathways into engineering. I've been really thinking about this, like sort of this skills gap bit, and I was sort of thinking, should I just throw lots of figures at you? And I thought, no, that would be really, really boring. So really looking at it through the lens of motorsports, I started thinking about, okay, so motorsports, F1, is like a very competitive sector. You've actually got lots of young people who want to go into that. You probably get some of the best talent in motorsports, you know, like, and across the board, probably have less of an issue with kind of recruiting young people into it. But there's other, you know, sort of things that the motorsport sector has, like in terms of diversity and so on, that we might want to address. The Hamilton Commission recently outlined that. But then it made me sort of start thinking about, you know, what is changing in the motorsport sector? It's like, you know, we're moving towards more electrification as well in that sort of sector. And then when you start thinking about skills gaps, that, you know, that means we need more electricians. We need people who work in that field. And then you start realizing, actually, it's not just electricians here. You need electricians for green energy, for solar panels, for all of those kind of areas. We did some research, or we commissioned some research a few years ago with Lightcast. And Lightcast, for those who don't know, is an organization that looks at sort of the job postings that are out there and sort of like based on current demand. And in that, as a result, for example, we saw that by 2030, we are expecting to need at least 10,000 new electricians per year. That was before we have even had an industrial strategy or anything like that going forward. So if you start thinking about kind of the changing nature of engineering skills, and you start, or like of skills generally, and you start thinking across like the different sectors, you realize that actually sort of engineering skills sit across loads of the growth areas for the industrial strategy, for the government, with construction being, for example, another really good example. We know that the government wants to build 1.5 million homes in 5 years. You need a lot of construction workers for that. But again, you don't need construction workers just for building homes. You need them to build power stations. You need them to build nuclear power stations. I always joke with my colleagues as well, that actually, if I didn't have this job, I probably would become a welder, because welding is honestly the one thing that you hear the most about, is that if we build HS2, we need all the welders in the country, and we don't have them. So it's really, you start seeing that actually the picture is something that doesn't just sit with one sector, but it is something that cuts across. And I will just end on the point of, I have a little bit of a worry at the moment that we, with the industrial strategy and the skills, the sector skills plans that are coming out, are starting to look quite siloed again at some of the, particularly engineering skills. And for example, I think the Office for Green Energy Jobs, great thing, but will it also understand that, in that, you need construction workers, and how does it link to that sort of wider picture? So really what we would quite like to see is across that a STEM, sort of an engineering and technology workforce strategy that cuts across, and we look to Skills England to do that.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. For those of you who are watching it on the video, it's 33 degrees in London today, so the thought of welding made me kind of want to drink a whole bottle of water. It's a really good point that you make, though. I think sometimes with things like the apprenticeship, the individual apprenticeships, they become quite narrow, and that's causing this kind of competition for particular occupations, when actually there's these kind of cross-cutting skills. So you mentioned the need for a cross-cutting strategy and the role of Skills England. I think that's a really important point. Is there any other advice that you'd give to try and get over this kind of constant competition between sectors for individual occupations?
I think it is around, if businesses realize that what they're actually wanting to do is create a pool of people, and we come from a young person's perspective, of engineers and technologists, then actually looking how they can work together, perhaps in regions, in supporting programs and apprenticeships that cut across, linking into their supply chains. I think that might be one way to approach it.
Yeah, I love that. And there's some great examples from the past of kind of work in supply chains. Yeah. One of the other things that we've seen is kind of in other jurisdictions, places like Central Europe, the kind of broader base of the apprenticeships kind of then narrowing down. Yeah. So kind of having that kind of broader skills and working in. So brilliant. Thank you so much for opening, Beatrice. And let's come straight to the front line of F1 racing. And Owen, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you think other sectors might be able to learn from F1?
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, so my name's Owen Carlos. I work for, I've got a great big lot of things there that I do allegedly. So I work at Red Bull Technology Campus, which is Oracle Red Bull Racing Formula One team, Red Bull Powertrains, and also a Red Bull Advanced Technology division, which is a spin-off of our Formula One technology. For those not that familiar with the industry, Formula One is a global sport. Every 2 weeks on average, we have a Grand Prix, 300-kilometer race around the world. The last race was in Austria, where our team was not as successful as we'd hoped, so I've answered many questions on that. But there are 10 teams at the moment that compete, and they're made up of all sorts of different people with different skills and backgrounds. The UK is very much a hub of Grand Prix engineering and Formula One engineering and expertise. So Red Bull are based in Milton Keynes, but there's other teams that are within sort of, not quite a stone's throw, but certainly within 2 hours, even less drive, there's the bulk of the teams are based there. One of the things that's interesting I think for the size of our business is actually we're really diverse in terms of what we do. So there's only 1,800 people work on a technology campus, but we have people working in human resources and finance and purchasing, engineering, manufacturing, even some welding goes on as well. Everything to do with the supply chain. And actually, we have a strong image externally of what Formula One is like, but it doesn't often align with what happens internally and what actually goes on within the industry. So one of the things we've tried to do is share that message as much as possible. And you make a really interesting point that, yeah, we have lots of people that would love to work for Red Bull or for another Grand Prix team. They don't really understand how or why or what they need to study or what the routes in are. Is it all the same level? And really there's a bit of a mystery around it. So one of the things that we've tried to do in the last it's been probably 4 or 5 years in the making, frankly, but certainly it's really come on the stream in the last year, is we've partnered with Milton Keynes College, and not to telegraph what you're going to say, Anna, but and we've got a school outreach program that we're running now called STEMX, which is sort of I've come prepared and to brand, and that's the STEM experience. So we're pushing out the message about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It's something we talked about doing a long time. It fits in with a larger talent academy program, so we're trying to bring students in, inspire them at a young age, but then also bring them back in for work experience, and then hopefully back in for industrial placements, and maybe even graduate level jobs or apprenticeships as appropriate. One of the things that inspired us to do this this program was hearing the story of talking to people in our local area about why they don't consider Red Bull or similar industries as suitable careers. And the one that always stuck in my mind was people were telling us, well, that's not for people like me, that's not for me. And it occurred to me that, okay, well, I can see why they have that opinion, but do they actually know what's there and what it is available and why you should consider these as careers? And I don't think that was really the case. So one of the things we've done is we work with higher education institutions, and we started talking to them originally about, okay, well, when do we need to talk to students? When do we need to talk to young people? And when do we need to turn them on to the idea that actually there is this whole world of science and engineering and mathematics there? And actually we'll find that the best age group is really, really young, so sort of 9, 10 years old onwards, when they're sort of opening their eyes to going to secondary school, seeing a wider world of education and what might lead beyond. But yeah, no, we found it's been really transformative, honestly. It's been really, really good.
Thank you so much, Owen. And I've heard this a lot from different industries that people have a very kind of surface level understanding. In a completely different area, we did some work with a mining company, and they said that when they talk to local people were like, oh, I don't want my child to become a miner. And that company doesn't employ any miners at all. It's all engineering, publicity, HR, all of the things you just talked about. So this feels like kind of something that cuts across a lot of different sectors. There's this kind of misunderstanding, and a lot of them are kind of more exciting, but also more diverse than people think. You said a little bit there about kind of what age is kind of best. What do you feel like? When should we be intervening with young people to kind of get them to open their eyes to these different areas?
Yeah, I think honestly at the right level in primary school is the way. I was talking to a university colleague, professor of mine, who was teaching proportional, integrated and derivative control to 5-year-olds. He didn't tell them that's what it was, but he said, if we want to work out how fast this is going, and we have to look at what it used to do and what it might do in the future. And he explained it in really simple terms. It's a really complicated subject that you study at university, but you can teach the basics and the philosophy to people almost of any age. And it's not about sort of brainwashing, it's about opening people's eyes to these other careers that are there and showing them what's possible.
Yeah, I love that. I know what those individual words mean, Owen, but tell me afterwards what the whole thing means together. But yeah, I think one of the things, again, that we've maybe missed in the education sector here is, which other countries have done really well, is being able to teach kind of core subjects through the lens of employment without necessarily saying you have to go and do that career. So like, why aren't we using the stage industry and lighting design, and then your work at Red Bull, day after day to teach maths? Like, there's maths in all of these careers, and we could do that without kind of, as you say, brainwashing for a particular career, but really kind of answering that question. When am I going to need to use this? Well, here's a real world example. So. Let's stick with the Milton Keynes connection. It's lovely to have you with us. So Anna, do you want to share a little bit about your work, and also just say a little bit about how you partner with Red Bull and bring that into your work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've been partners with Red Bull for quite some time. We've worked with them on early years careers, so we have apprentices that we jointly work with together and all different types of disciplines. And I think it was from that relationship we started to realise we have these kind of joint values, is how I would describe them, for inclusion, for diversity, for making sure that actually nobody's left behind when we're doing some of these activities. So from that, and from the statistics that Owen's clearly spoken about, we could see that young people, particularly in our local area, were not aspiring to some of the incredible organisations we've got in Milton Keynes to work for. They literally were thinking, that's not for me, something else is for me. So we just wanted to change that point of view, and that's where we started. And Owen's right, it was a long time coming. We had a few iterations, didn't we? At one stage, we were going to have a school on the Red Bull campus, but once we realised that was a heavy-duty manufacturing site, by all accounts, and we were bringing 9-year-olds in coach loads, we shied from that. But there was another reason we backed away from that, is because actually when you talk about inclusion, when young people have to go somewhere, that involves cost and coach and that kind of sign-off. When you go to them, it takes away some of those barriers. So actually what we did is redesign STEMx to go to young people. We designed activities that are quite synonymous with F1. So you do a tyre change activity. While you're doing the tyre change activity, the team are talking about aerodynamics with them. They're talking about friction and force and downforce and how that means. But we're also, quite honestly, building in that competitive element. So we're timing them doing it. So we're kind of building this hype that comes with F1 and is a really important part of it. But we also do a coding activity. So we're starting to talk to them about why data is so important. Regardless of what sector you're in, data is going to play a big part moving forward. We race cars down a track with gas canisters behind them, don't we? Which Owen and I have had hours of fun testing, obviously. So once again, that competitive, that team element, all of those core skills that we're always talking about our young people needing, resilience, they're all being embedded in there. And then finally, we do a green screen task where we put them in front of a camera. We give them a scenario, and the scenario normally is, it's race day, it's all gone wrong. The car's off the track, the driver's in the hospital, you know, you've now got to face the world press. What are you going to tell them? And inevitably, that starts with, well, it wasn't my fault. And then we roll that back. And actually what they're learning is actually, how do you start to communicate in a team way? How do you build that resilience? How do you talk together to get that over? So we're starting to wrap some of those things in as well. And actually it all comes to a podium finish at the end, which is very F1. There's a huge celebration, there's photos. But what we've also done is we've mapped the national curriculum to the tasks. So there is a portal that the teachers can go on to. They can download activities, which means it's fitting into the everyday and it's not taking a chunk out of what is quite a busy schedule in terms of curriculum as well. So it's all round, it's been quite successful. I think we started delivering in earnest about March time. As of last week, we'd got to 1,700 young people in schools in the local area. We did design it with Red Bull so that actually it was a blueprint that could be lifted and shifted anywhere. And I think the really exciting thing that we've all been part of doing is that accessibility bit. So we've worked with the homeschool network locally. We've had an event for them. We've been into schools where there are more neurodiverse young people, and we've changed the activities to make sure that works. And we've particularly focused on schools that are in some of the deprived areas that actually sometimes this is the first kind of activity they've had. And it's really interesting for us to watch. We were talking when we first started that 9 years old, they are so engaged. They want to do this. They want to understand the careers. They want to form opinions. And, you know, inevitably some people have been completely converted to F1 and are now super fans. But others are looking at other careers as a result of it. So I think as a programme for us, it's really delivered what we set to do. I think we will continue iterations of it. Because as Owen says, we're quite interested in sort of STEM tots and starting to kind of disrupt thought processes at that early age. And then equally, what happens when you post GCSEs? Because a lot of our young people who are our normal cohort at college quite rightly still haven't formed opinions on what they want to do. They're just kind of doing what we all did and trying a few things. So, yeah, it's been an exciting collaboration for us.
That sounds amazing. I think you'll probably have a queue of people wanting to come along and visit you one of those days. It sounds really fun, particularly the kind of press conference at the end. I think what you were saying about young people still being kind of eyes bright at age 9 says a lot about the education system. We'll talk about this a bit more, but like what happens after that with GCSEs that means that they're not so engaged, and we can come on to that. But I really wanted to pull out kind of a couple of things that you said because I think they're really powerful. One of those was just thinking about kind of those core skills that everyone's going to need, and why not make it a both and? You can teach the curriculum, as you say, it's all mapped back to the national curriculum, but you can do it in a way that also teaches teamwork, also teaches problem solving. So I guess this is kind of speaking to the educational traditionalists. Like it's not a choice. You can't. It's not either chalk or talk or this. This is a chance to do the knowledge-rich stuff and Owen's example of primary school kind of speaks to that as well, but also to get into that. I guess, what advice would you give to another sector that hasn't got this yet and might be starting out and thinking, oh, this sounds really good, like I could do this for whatever it might be, horticulture, building, construction. What would be the kind of first steps for them to kind of do something similar?
I would say, first of all, it is completely transferable. We're already talking about actually how do we do this in particularly construction at the moment, because we're starting to notice a trend of young people having a perception of what construction is rather than a reality of what construction is currently. And I think it is, I mean, I'm always going to bang the drum for further education, but we are so well placed to do this because we have that connectivity into schools already. Our partners are the HE universities, and actually we do work together, FE colleges. So I think for me it's making that connection, finding the right partner, and then working together to make it happen.
That's really nice, and I love that point about the connectivity that FE can have, because as we both know, FE can feel like the forgotten sector, but actually it's right in the middle between school and university. You're partnering with employers, that's your natural kind of habitat, so being that kind of connector is a really powerful role to play, I think.
And as a general rule, FE has its roots in its community in a way that not many other sectors do. Yeah,
brilliant. Great. Well, let's zoom out a little bit from Milton Keynes. Welcome, Anne. Lovely to have you with us as well. Do you want to introduce yourself and say a little bit about where you're seeing the kind of drivers of the wider skills shortage at the moment?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Anne Watson. I'm the Chief Executive of the Engineerity Group. Engineerity Group is a charitable group working across the engineering and manufacturing sector in its broadest sense. And what we do as a team is all around ensuring that employers have got the skills they need to be successful. So that covers a multitude of different activities, which we haven't got time to go into today. But I guess picking up the point in terms of skills gaps, there's not an easy answer. There's a number of different things that contribute the skills gaps across engineering and manufacturing. And actually at the moment, we're seeing not just a skills gap, but a people gap. Because we actually haven't got enough people in the sector. So we've got two challenges to deal with. And I think in terms of some of the challenges we've got, I mean, I think we've touched on it earlier in terms of, excuse me, the perception of engineering and manufacturing to young people and to their parents and often to their teachers, because as Anna's made the point, quite often in the local kind of community, the schools don't know what is engineering, manufacturing, what's on their doorstep. So there's a big piece there around, I think, perception. It is improving. I think we are getting through to young people and their parents in terms of the fantastic careers that are available within the sector. We lost lots of people during the pandemic. Both through redundancies. 11,000 people lost their jobs in the aerospace sector as a result of COVID-19. We lost many more experienced workers who decided to have a life change. So that's really contributed to kind of the people gap. And then there's other issues as well. Anna will love me to say this, but FE is chronically underfunded. So lots of the apprenticeships, particularly the SMEs need, are not available because they're just not economically viable for colleges and providers to deliver. So we work with lots of small businesses in the metal sectors and what government's now calling the foundation industries, who desperately want to recruit young people and apprentices, but the apprenticeship isn't there, because who can deliver a kind of a level 2 apprenticeship in engineering and manufacturing for £5,000 or £6,000 for the duration of that apprenticeship. So it was good to see in the Advanced Manufacturing Plan and the Industrial Strategy a recognition around funding bands for FE having not been increased since 2016. But when you consider things like energy costs have gone up by 30%, and the FE network actually has to power what they do. We've talked about welding. And I think we'll probably continue to touch on welding as we go through. But I think there's also something about industry coming together with government and actually once and for all trying to solve some of these skills gaps. I talk about the fact that the platform has been burning for a very long time. And personally, I believe that the only way to actually stop it from continuing to burn is by bringing industry and government together. Because it's not government's problem, it's not industry's problem, it's everybody's problem to solve these skills gaps. And unless we actually get different sectors around the table, and kind of Beatrice's point around silos, we're never going to solve the problem. Because at the moment, if we look at Scotland, we are importing welders from the Philippines to meet the skills gap on the Clyde, whilst the renewable sector in Scotland are basically poaching the welders for their requirements. So we're actually creating a really vicious circle. So I do think there's more actually that all of us can do together to solve this. But I also think, and I agree with Beatrice's point about, it's great to have a skills plan, but actually what we need is a workforce plan, because the skills plan will only solve part of the problem. And what we need to be looking is really longer term, considering how many people we need to build Hinkley Point C, and then what do we do with those welders or those trained personnel once that nuclear power station's built. We need to be thinking about where we place them next, and a skills plan doesn't do that. But I think if we could convince government to think of, I guess, the economy and everything they're in control of like a big business, most good businesses have workforce development plans, so why not have one for the UK?
Thank you very much, Anne. I'm already feeling hot under the collar from the welding, and then you started mentioning the burning platform, and now I'm feeling like I'm kind of losing. I need some more water. But yeah, I think what you were mentioning at the start there about being a bit more forensic. You know, there's quite a lot of lazy language in here, particularly in the press, about skills gaps, skills shortages, skills mismatches, all being used for similar things. And actually, it's more detailed than that. There are skills gaps. There are skills shortages, and there are people shortages, and I think all of those are important, and we need to understand which is which. And in some industries, it's a shortage of people based on kind of the wages that are offered or the terms and conditions, and we have to be kind of a bit honest about that as well. Yeah. But I think your message about collaboration, both between sectors, which came up in Beatrice's comments, and between sectors in government, is really, really important. Obviously, you work in that sort of space. Do you feel like the appetite is there? Is it just a matter of bringing people together, or are there kind of barriers that are kind of stopping that collaboration?
I think we're starting to get the appetite there. I mean, I would hope that with Skills England now in post, I think we've probably got the best opportunity. I also think from an industry perspective, some employers are actually starting to realise that we cannot continue with the status quo. Something has got to change. I think particularly the announcements recently from government in terms of skilled migration and their desire to actually reduce that and bring it to a stop. I absolutely understand when you've got close to 1 million young people out of education, employment and training, then we need to do something to actually give those young people a future. But equally, you don't train a welder overnight. It takes 3 or 4 years to train some of the roles we've got in engineering manufacture. So there is a place for migration, but I think some of these levers are actually now, I think, getting industry to actually start to think about doing some things differently. We'll always have employers who think the easiest way for them is to pay 50 pence an hour more than their nearest competitor and poach those staff. But when they do that, they're generally weakening their own supply chains. So actually, it's to nobody's benefit. And I think it's really about now kind of grasping the nettle and doing something about it.
Thank you, and I want to pick up that kind of point with the rest of the panel now and just think about kind of how can we move this narrative into a more kind of collaborative place. You know, you were mentioning, Anna, about that your work in FE College. Obviously, this is one small part of a bigger picture. What can we be doing to kind of increase collaboration between sectors and try and kind of take a bit of a zoomed out view about the wider economy?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to do because FE by nature is quite localised, but actually we do work together. So I think the great thing about the current policy is it's starting to bring FE colleges together, so you get a more collective voice, which is important, because if you're an employer, you don't necessarily want to speak to 20 colleges across the country. You want to speak to a lead college and move it on from there. But I do think we need all the experts together to find the solutions and to share the expertise of where we've got to, what have we done, what can we revisit. And I think one of the key things for us, and Owen is by far the expert on this because he spoke to our senior team about it on Friday, is that willingness to admit that things will go wrong, that we're not going to get it right. And I think that's quite an important part as well, that we've got to try different things and we've got to be a little bit creative.
Yeah.
Because if the solution was easy, I'm pretty sure we'd have found that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that point, and it's something that we're not good at in education, is it? Because we've got this kind of Ofsted culture of like we've got to pretend that everything's been perfect always. So Owen, do you want to pick up the story there? What's your feeling as an employer with the kind of collaboration piece?
Yeah, I just pick up on that
Cool.
point. I think sport and motorsport's a really good example of that, because somebody's going to win and somebody's going to come last. So the sport and the competition you get from that builds in that idea of failure and realism, and I think once you accept that, then you can really go for it. But in terms of collaboration, like I said earlier on, we're a fairly small industry. It's a cottage industry in some regards, so there's lots of conversations that happen between different Formula One teams. But more than that, we also talk quite a lot with the wider motorsport industry. So it's not just F1, there's a whole ecosystem of businesses that support it, but also other racing series, other institutions that all kind of come together. There's various different groups that organise and orchestrate that, but there's quite a strong sense of what the motorsport industry needs. And as successful as we've been with Anna and NK College and the team, there's also still, one of the things we're trying to do is also reinforce the idea that, look, these are motorsport careers. This isn't just a way to get a job at Red Bull. This is a whole industry out there. And you can go and make it what you will. There's lots of specialist manufacturing and high-value stuff that's going on that people perhaps don't appreciate. I was talking to somebody whose daughter was at school in Northampton, and they're talking about, it's a traditional area for manufacturing of shoes. And like, well, yeah, it is. But there's other things as well. It's not just a load of cobblers. Like there's other really high-end manufacturing and research into 3D printing and advanced materials and AI and all these sort of technologies and buzzwords, frankly, that's happening there. And it's about sharing that perspective. And I think motorsport should be a really good place to promote that and inspire people, because it is exciting and it's fun and everything else.
Yeah, great, Owen, thank you. And Beatrice, you work right across the engineering sector, so do you see pockets of this collaboration already? What can we do to kind of stoke up the kind of collaboration?
I think I've just been sitting here sort of really thinking about this, like kind of, and what drives the non-collaboration sometimes, perhaps, like, and what can we do about that? So I think one of the things that is really interesting that I've observed is, like, because we have a levy system, an apprenticeship levy system, it is a little bit sometimes, the levy, it's like a great thing, it's been introduced, it brings like money into the system, but it's also meant that like some businesses kind of go like, it's my levy and I'm spending it on what I'm spending it on, and if I haven't spent it, then it's lost, and it's actually not, it all goes back into the system. So in effect, actually, the levy is the sort of way of kind of thinking about collaboratively. And then I was thinking about how do you make sure that businesses don't think like that, and that comes back to the point that you made, I think, around, I always call it, there needs to be sort of a sweet spot of a symbiosis between government and business. And if you get that right, I think that's when you get collaboration. And I think what's happening at the moment is that we're not quite there yet. Like kind of businesses feel like they're paying for everything, but the government doesn't want to pay for everything because they think businesses are not paying enough. Yeah. And there's somewhere, there is a bit of truth in both of these things. And I think it's about the sweet spot on which bits are government-owned, like things that they need to deal with as a country, and which are the bits that businesses should be really, taking responsibility for. And I think if we get that right, I think that's when we will create a more collaborative culture.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and more of an adult-to-adult conversation between business and government about whose responsibilities, whose. Yeah. I think that's really powerful. I wanted to pick up one other kind of theme from what you said, Anne, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. So I was putting it on people's radar to have a think about questions if you'd like to put them in. But Anne, you mentioned this kind of question. I think it's really important to bring this out explicitly of the kind of new role of Skills England and how much we should be moving from kind of a purely market-driven to a bit more of a planned economy, particularly with some of the big projects. We've seen massive cost overruns on things like HS2, and it just kind of makes you weep and think, if only we'd kind of had a bit more of a structural approach. So where would you take this? And then I'll come to the rest of the panel to kind of ask for your thoughts on that theme.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we need something like, as I say, a workforce plan. If you look at engineering and manufacture, technology is moving so quickly, and I mean, Owen will know that better than anybody in terms of some of the materials and other things that they're using within Formula One. And that rapid pace of change means that from a skills perspective, it's really difficult, even for the large organisations, to know what skills they're going to need and what people they're going to need into the future. Because again, things like robotics and automation actually could be a positive way to fill the skills gap. But I think only by having that workforce plan can you really think about all of the inputs and all of the outputs to be able to make some of those kind of very, very sensible decisions. And when we have got really big infrastructure projects, just recognising the fact that you're going to have a huge demand for certain skills in a particular region for a finite point in time, then what do you do with those people? I think at the moment as a country, we get everybody to Hinkley Point C, if we use that as an example, but not thinking about what do you do to all of those individuals who've either been trained to make that particular demand or relocated permanently or temporary. Once that infrastructure project is completed, we'll suddenly have a glut of certain skills in one region, but massive demand probably for the certain same skills in a different region. And I think that's where we've got to get, and I think between Skills England and the government, but also being kind of cajoled and to some extent pressured into doing this is, I think, absolutely kind of looking at a regional approach is appropriate, but I think the regional approach also needs to have that national umbrella as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you don't just get kind of a competition, but at a different level between regions. Beatrice, where would you take us on this kind of competition or collaboration between sectors, kind of planning area?
Sorry, say that again. The kind of
in terms of how much the government should be kind of planning the workforce and how much we should leave it to the free market.
Yeah, like I think again, it's kind of businesses drive like the kind of I would say the skills that they need and the demand. But I think there's a role in terms of government taking what businesses tells them and like looking strategically across and really helping ultimately business to identify, actually if you looked across here, like we could work together on that. And it comes back to that collaboration piece. It is about enabling that, like through some structure that you put in place. So that's kind of where I think it could be really helpful.
Thank you, Beatrice. Owen, Anna, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I think clearly there's more that we can do on the industrial side. Frankly, just not tripping over our own feet and understanding what we want as a strategy is tricky. I think motorsport, as I think it offers a huge amount. It's not always amazing at strategic thinking because we're really focused on the next race or the next season. One of the things that I think is really interesting and is linked to much wider policy and transportation is what we do with power units and how we actually propel the cars along in the coming years. So the next season, if you're a fan of F1, you'll be aware that we're changing regulations and we're switching engines, and that's a large part of what I've been doing recently in our commercial work with Ford is linked to that. But that could be the last hydrocarbon, and these are sustainable fuels, this might be the last hydrocarbon fuel that we use in Grand Prix racing. So what replaces it? And actually there's no real one answer to that, I don't think, and it's a situation that's mirrored in the whole transportation industry. I think maybe Anna, you mentioned earlier on, like if there was an obvious solution to this problem, we'd have found it by now. We use lots of different fuels now, depending on what the vehicle is, and probably it's going to be the same thing in motorsport. It'll have its own specific way. So in that situation, then yeah, clearly we're very closely trying to align with wider policy.
Thank you. Anna, did you want to come in?
I think the thing that's of real interest to me is, because I completely agree with the workforce plan, but I think it's that linkage as well with the difference we have between what business wants and what the supply chain of people is looking for. So it's almost that careers and influencing piece that needs to come alongside, because otherwise you've almost got two pipelines, sometimes never crossing over. And it's about giving young people and adults really good advice on actually where are the skills of the future, where can you hang your hat? If you're going to invest in skills personally, where do you invest? And how do you know that? And I think it's bringing those two together that's quite important for me to make it a success, because otherwise we'll be furrowing two furrows.
Very true, very true. Great. So I'm going to come out to the audience in just a moment and grab a couple of thoughts, and then I'm going to come back, just putting it on your radar, and ask for a kind of final thought from each of our panelists about a policy or funding change that you would make in this area to kind of really make a difference to what we've been talking about. So I'm going to come out now. My gift to you is that you don't have to pretend it's a question. If you want to make a comment, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, I just want to kind of get a few thoughts, and then we'll come back to that as a panel. So don't be afraid to put your hand up. Colleague just there at the back. I think we've got a roving mic. Yeah, just on its way to you now. Do say who you are and where you're from.
Hey, hello. My name is Emily Andrews. I'm from the Centre for Ageing Better, although in a few weeks I will be off the Learning and Work Institute, but I'm kind of talking with my Centre for Ageing Better hat on, actually. You know, I was struck by kind of Anne's comments about, in a sense, you know, where is the talent pipeline going to come from, right? And how long is it going to take? You know, we've got incredibly high NEET levels, so there's clearly something there about young people. What are we doing to kind of move young people into places where there are people gaps, skills gaps, and skill shortages. But also, of course, there's many people over 25 who, and you know, unemployment is low, but there are a lot of people over 25 who are talented, resourceful, resilient, but unable to access the labour market because of a caring responsibility or because of a health condition. And you know, I talk all the time to people who I just think, what an extraordinary waste that because you can't find an employer to think slightly differently about what a job looks like, either from a kind of flexible perspective in terms of hours, or in terms of, you know, just job carving, thinking about, okay, so you can't do the totality of this job. Actually, you have these skills that cover this, this, and this, so we can carve a job out of that and really make use of these skills. It's not straightforward to do that. It's, you know, challenging for an employer, especially if you're working on small margins. So I'm just really genuinely interested to know, how much do you think that kind of thinking about jobs is a kind of possibility for the engineering advanced manufacturing sectors, and what kind of support might employers need in order to kind of make a reality of those accessible jobs?
Great, really important point. Thank you. Let's stick with that. Owen, do you want to start off as somebody who's on the employment end?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually, and I think in some ways Formula One is a terrible example. In other ways, it's really good, and in this case, it is really good. So I think Formula One is the original remote working. So for I don't know how long, 100+ years, we've had people of teams going away and working at a racing circuit and then coming back to the base where they hang out. Almost by design, we have a team of 100 people that go, and it doesn't matter whereabouts in the world they're based. It could be Brazil, it could be Miami, it could be Montreal, it could be in the UAE or Saudi Arabia, and they work exactly the same way. And we have people that work remotely. I know I get emails at all sorts of weird times of day, and actually we're really good at doing that remote working and supporting that. And some of the specialisms, high-performance computing is a great example, where actually it's kind of industry norm to work remotely. For others, more mechanical engineering, everyone's round together and the best weapon you have is your pencil and you're drawing ideas. But I think Formula One has done a great job at doing that side of things. It's done, you know, trying to champion the sport a bit, but I think we do well there. And the other thing I was going to say was, because it's a sport, we're continually challenged to reevaluate and rethink how we divide up the business. So if there's a new competitive area in, let's use AI as an example, right? If we need to create a whole AI team and that's going to make the car faster, we'll do it tomorrow. Like there's so little momentum in what we do in that sense, and a little inertia, sorry, so you can build momentum really quickly.
Good. And Anna, you mentioned some of the work that you were doing, kind of adapting the program to young people with different needs. Do you want to say a little bit more about that in this context?
Yeah, I think the inclusion agenda is really important, and I completely understand what you're saying, because we regularly have adults walk through our doors who have got caring responsibilities, or they need to work at different times of the day, and even in the current system that we have, flexing education to meet their needs can be really challenging to do, but it's so important, because in a world where you haven't got enough workforce, there is absolutely the case for leaving no one behind again, and making sure that you're engaging in different ways. We try to put lenses on everything we do to make sure that we're inclusive, we've got diversity covered, we're thinking about all of these different things. But speaking for further education, that's difficult to do when you're in a fairly locked down sector in terms of what you can offer and how you can offer it. So flexibilities around that would let us fly. Absolutely, they would let us fly and bring some of those people into the mix, because it's so important.
Absolutely, and you mentioned briefly neurodiversity, which I think is another aspect of that that's really important.
Absolutely.
Like, that is untapped talent, where because we can't flex both the education system and the employment system, we're not getting the most out of those people, and they're not getting the most fulfilling careers. Beatrice, did you want to come in on this, or Anne?
It just really, I'm just really interested to hear kind of what you had to say. I think there's, finding more inclusive ways going forward is going to be absolutely fundamental. The engineering technology sector is generally not greatly diverse, particularly when it comes to women, and that kind of speaks to that caring point. Particularly, men care as well, but it is often sort of women. And really finding ways, both in the pathways, that's from a younger person's perspective, but also at that workforce level, because we see actually huge dropout rates of engineering talent at the age, ultimately a childbearing age. That's the reality. And so just to say, I think that's where businesses and companies need to look at how to address that.
Yeah, perfect. Did you want to come in, Anne? Or?
Yeah, I'll just make a couple of points. I think it's a very important question, particularly given what's going on and some of the conversations going on in Parliament this week. I think for me, one element of it is how do we educate employers, particularly small employers. So 99% of the businesses in manufacturing are SMEs. So it's how to give them the right advice and the right hand-holding to demonstrate that they can have a disabled individual working for them, or somebody who's a carer, and actually make it work. Because I think quite often the desire is there, they just don't know where to start. I think that's the first point. The other point I would make, again, is around the system. So again, lots of the work we do is with smaller businesses who really want to engage with some of these young people that possibly school has forgotten or school wasn't appropriate to them. So they're very keen to kind of recruit on behaviours and just that kind of attitude. But for an apprenticeship, the entry requirements actually mean that those young people can't have that opportunity because they haven't got the right GCSEs. And then when we move on to kind of over 24s, you've then got the relaxation around maths and English, which is brilliant. But the funding for an over 24 to go on an apprenticeship is then a lot lower, so it's not as advantageous. And some of the work that Ingenuity are doing to help some of these groups, so we're in the process of developing a strategic workforce development planning toolkit to support SMEs in looking at some of these minority groups and letting them realise that actually it's possibly not as difficult as they perceive it to be. We've also got plans to support 2 alternative provision activities this year. So there's some great alternative provision for those kids that they didn't like school and school didn't like them. There's some great examples of alternative provision actually training them and giving them a career in engineering and manufacture. And we want to support some of these organisations to be able to do more. And then finally, I think your point about full-time carers, one of the other things we do, and it just shows what you can do with a small amount of money, is we offer scholarships to allow disadvantaged adults to access higher education. And some of the stories for those people, and we're not talking huge amounts of money, but people who've got full-time caring responsibilities, just a small scholarship gives them the opportunity to be able to pay somebody to look after their partner whilst they go to university. We had a lovely response from somebody about how life-changing it was, because it meant that they could work fewer hours in their second job. So I think for lots of these people, and particularly in certain areas of the country, and I'm from Teesside, and Teesside's probably one of those areas where government look at Teesside and go, nobody's got an ambition. There's lots of very ambitious people in these areas. They just need a leg up.
Love that. Such an important point, and thank you for bringing that theme up as well. I'm going to come back round now as we come to the end of our time and just ask, we've covered a lot of ground in that session, but what would be your kind of ask to policymakers, to the system, something that we might change to really make a lot of this easier? It's not, as we've said repeatedly, there's no silver bullet here, but there are probably levers that we could pull to make things a little bit easier, a little bit less challenging. And I'd come down from Anne this way. So Anne, what would your ask be?
I think my biggest ask is, I think, a recognition from government and from Skills England that they have a huge amount of convening power. There are so many different organisations passionate about engineering and manufacturing and want to do the right thing about the sector. And I think what I would like to see is the government and DFE, Skills England, to recognise that they have the power to bring all of these people together and to do something. And even if it's to do 3 things, but do 3 things really well. I always say it's much easier if you've got 20 people pushing 1 boulder, it will move, than 20 people pushing 20 boulders.
Yeah, I love that point. It's really important. And obviously, with the kind of fiscal climate as it is, the message from the Treasury to departments, to civil services, there's no money. And that's something that doesn't cost any money, like using that soft power, bringing people together, albeit not being able to pay for the biscuits, if I remember my days in the civil service. But bringing people together is powerful, as you say, and it doesn't need to cost. And the willingness tends to be there for organisations to get together in those kind of forums. Thank you. Beatrice, what would your ask be?
I'm going to say 2 things.
That's okay, you're allowed.
So one is, I'm going to repeat the point about the workforce strategy and actually link to that a STEM education and skills plan. And that's the bit that's not costing really actually any money. I think the point about money is a really important one at the moment. But I'm also going to put out there something that we've been asking for some time, and I think is really important when we talk about the symbiosis between business and government, and that and really thinking about the many young people that we know at the moment are in need and actually that we need coming through. So this whole point about the people gap actually versus the skill gap is a really, really important one. Young people are often seen, I think, by business as a little bit risky initially, because they haven't, they come through school and they don't really know what they're doing and so on. So actually, to take out some of the risk for employers is sort of funding for 16 to 19-year-olds for apprenticeships, take them out of the levy, and actually for government to take some responsibility about funding their training as they do with A-levels and T-levels.
Really, really good point. And I think we're yet to see the impact of the mission boards, which I was quite excited about in terms of taking more of an overarching view over the kind of the big missions. But I think what you're saying is even above those, there needs to be some kind of cross-cutting issues so that we're not kind of, the green mission isn't in competition with the house building mission. But yeah, I think we're saying kind of more collaboration and more of a kind of helicopter view of some of this to make sure that we get it right. Owen, what would your ask be?
Yeah, I think at the same time as having that wider perspective and the whole industry view, I think it's also important to consider that engineering is not a career, it's a whole spectrum of different things, and it's so easy to tar it with the same brush. We've just talked about welding. It seems to be the theme of the morning. I'm not really sure why. It just is, But that's just one part of this huge sort of kaleidoscope that we have, and we could easily as well talk about materials engineering and really understanding advanced materials and why things fail. If you're into Netflix, I can highly recommend watching the Titan submersible documentary, because it shows exactly what materials engineers do and why they're important. But there's lots and lots of little clusters like this all the way through the engineering field, and it's important to really understand what it is we exactly want. It's quite easy to say, we want engineers. Well, that's great. It's like saying, I want people. Of course you do, but what do you want them to do? What do they actually need to do? And that's linked to where the industry is going. There's been a really good conversation this morning about future trends, but what are these people actually doing? There's a whole raft of specialisms inside that. I think it's important to keep that in perspective.
Great, really good point, Owen. And Anna, what would your ask be?
Honestly, all of that, I completely got Anne's point about that convening power and bringing this together, sharing that best practice, seeing what's working, what's not working. I think if I was speaking as an FE specialist, I would say it's about having trust in us that we can deliver and giving us the flexibilities we need to be able to reach every part that we need to. That's what will make the difference.
Yeah, I love that point. That's really good. Great. Well, thank you so much. As the checkered flag comes down on the session, sorry, I couldn't resist one more. We're going to wish Owen luck in the British Grand Prix this weekend and his team. And otherwise, a huge thank you to all my panelists and a really good day to all of you at the conference. So thank you so much.